terms of the political debate have started to change with the change in the economy. Most news on the economy comes out now is pretty good, and that is likely to continue into certainly the first part of 2014. I suspect the Chancellor, when it comes to the March budget, will up the growth rates further, as he did at the autumn statement. So Labour's fallback position to deal with this is to talk about, yeah, but who's benefiting from it? Can that be sustained through 2014?
Well, it can be sustained if it fits in with people's experiences. And what the Labour Party are counting on is that a lot of people watching this programme, a lot of people watching politics in general say, well, it doesn't feel like a recovery to me. I am feeling squeezed. Now, there's a debate about the figures. The Labour Party have got that figure of £1,500 that we talked about, I think, last week, didn't we? About the drop in average earnings since the last election. There is a real counter to it, which is it doesn't take in tax cuts, it doesn't factor everything in. There'd still be a cut, but it'd be a slightly lower cut. The Prime Minister uses a figure which, frankly, no one I know uses. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says is misleading as a figure, but it is an official bit of data. He talks about real household disposable income. And what he's doing there is taking effectively the aggregate, all of the incomes of all of the people in the country, and they are going up.
Yes,
now,
but
frankly, it may be very interesting, but it doesn't tell you anything about how households are feeling. Nor
does he do it on a per capita basis, because overall real household income has gone up because there are more households. The population's rising. The only way to measure if the living standards of the household itself go up is if you do it on a per capita basis.
But interesting, Andrew, you and I have talked about this before. I talked to some backroom Tory the other day. They're investing in next year. Their view is that the per capita, the per head, real disposable household income will go up. So by using the figure now, what they're trying to do is give it a little bit of currency, a bit of flavour, so that when the figure goes up per head, they can say, hey, presto, there we are. It actually is going up.
And part of the squeeze on living standards that Labour quite rightly points to has been caused because the Bank of England keeps on missing its inflation target. Inflation has been consistently higher than the 2% target at a time when wages have either been static or barely rising at all. Significance this week of the 2.1% inflation was that they got pretty close to the target.
That's right. But there are two things. There's the sort of accidental squeeze through price increases. There's also, which people rarely talk about, a completely deliberate part of policy. The whole point of austerity, how do you control the size of the public sector? One way you do it is to cut public sector wages. Lots of people work in the public sector. If their wages go up less than the rate of inflation, which the government's in favour of, interesting, the Labour Party says it would match, then, yeah, sure enough, their household incomes drop because their incomes are made up of their wages and their wages aren't keeping up with inflation.
When will living standards start to rise?
Well, the OBR is forecasting increases from next year, but we recognise that times have been very tough, and I think it would be wrong to give the impression that people in Westminster are completely unaware of the fact that people have suffered a squeeze in living standards. The Prime Minister said in Prime Minister's questions the point about the fact that we have suffered the largest drop, largest recession in 100 years. Our economy contracted by over 7%. It is taking time to recover, and that is, of course, feeding through to household budgets. The only point I would say about the income is that the use of wages, the income figure also includes the benefits, and it also includes the tax cuts that the wages figure alone doesn't actually recognise. And that, I think, it is important to know that households receive its wages, of course, are part, but there are other sources of income, particularly benefits.
But part of the problem is that the national statistics on the real household income, which does take into account everything, and I've been using it myself, but for some curious reason, it also includes income to universities and charities. Well, why do you do that?
Well, I think that's. I think the ONS would have to answer that, and I think you're right, which is actually saying it's a broader.
So it makes it an unreliable measure. But let me ask you: here's the political question: will living standards by May of 2015 be higher than they were in May of 2010?
I think it's very difficult to make that prediction. As a politician approaching general election, I would love to be able to say yes.
No, I know what you'd love to say, but what's I'm well aware of that.
I don't think that's going to be a great revelation to anybody else.
But will they or won't they?
Well, the OBR is certainly forecasting that living standards will go up. People will
No. Let's just get right what the OBR is forecasting. That's, I mean, you're a Treasury Minister, aren't you?
Yeah.
Well, the OBR does not forecast. So what the OBR forecasts that sometime, I think, is in the second half of 2014, wages start to pull ahead of prices. That's not saying that overall living standards are going to rise. That's a different figure.
I was just going to say was that the OBR is forecasting an increase in wages, but there are obviously going to be. Well, I think I was about to say that before I was interrupted.
Well, I'm not sure you were actually.
There is a
living standards are going to rise.
No, I said wages, and actually.
Why did you get it so wrong over the jobs in this economy? Your leader predicted a loss of 1 million jobs since the Tory-led coalition, and you got it completely wrong.
Just as when we introduced the national minimum wage, David Cameron predicted that there'll be 1 million jobs lost in the economy, and actually we put 2 million jobs onto the economy.
So shouldn't you have learned from that wrong prediction to make another ridiculous... So excuse me, your answer to me, having made a ridiculous prediction, which turned out to be totally wrong, your answer to me is, oh, well, David Cameron made one 15 years ago.
I'm just saying that predictions are not normally a wise territory for politicians. But interesting.
You just got it completely wrong, didn't you?
Well, one of the interesting... David Cameron's prediction, of course, for this Parliament was that they would have got rid of all of the deficit by the end of the Parliament. And we now learn that there'll be 109 billion pounds.
Politicians shouldn't predict.
So you're both useless, is what you're telling me.
Well, to be honest, you know, sometimes I sit and I watch... Sometimes I watch...
How many jobs...
Please let me finish one sentence, Andrew.
Just one, though.
I'm nearly always in the chamber for Prime Minister's questions.
Yeah.
I just found it quite depressing watching it from outside. When you're in there, you get caught up in all the noise and the shouting and all that. But to be honest, watching it from outside...
No, we love it.
I think it's really depressing.
We think
and the noise volume now is far higher than it's ever been.
Depressing because of the noise.
How many...
I'd love to ban questions that say, will the Prime Minister agree with me? Or will the Prime Minister congratulate the following people?
Right.
You were sitting here going, oh, guess what? Yes, he's going to.
How many new jobs have been created since 2010?
I don't know. All I know in my own constituency is one of the things that's made a dramatic difference.
You don't know?
I don't know, but I know that
1.6 million.
But I don't know how
400,000 lost in the public sector, so the net is 1.2. Well, overall 1.6 million jobs have been created, and your leader said we're actually going to lose 1 million. So you were out by 2.6 million.
And in my constituency,
almost as bad as your Polish immigration figures.
And in my constituency at the moment, what's happening is there's about to be another run of cuts because my local authority's got to find £70 million worth of cuts, which is
you should be very happy, Chris, because the claimant count is down by 200 in your constituency as of today.
And that's because of what the Welsh Assembly think. Don't keep on misleading people.
I'm going to be the Speaker.
To clarify.
Order. Take as long as we like. No, we can't, unfortunately. Yeah, I do that well.